Good morning. This is Talk Back for Change, the variation of Talk Back to Television about people who are doing things outside of the normal course of business. And my guest today is Dallas Lawrence from Telly, but he is doing something substantially outside the normal course of business. Dallas, how are you?
Great to be with you. I'm doing wonderful. Thank you.
Great. And you are here talking about a book that you've written, and as we talked in the warm-up, this is technically a talk show, and talk shows tend to be on the book tours.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and and so you're in good company. I've been here with Stephanie Mitchko from AMC and Charter and Cablevision, promoting her book at one point, and Maria Dunshee from AT&T AdWorks in Ogilvy talking about her book. So, first of all, why'd you write a book?
That's a great question because it's not an easy undertaking, as it turns out. You know what? I began my career a little differently than a lot of people in our media entertainment space, and that is I worked in the political space. So I had the opportunity at a very early age to work for the President of the United States in some very senior level roles, ultimately becoming the White House spokesperson for the war in Iraq, leading public affairs for the Pentagon, for Rumsfeld, and for Secretary Gates. And then transitioning out of that into the agency world where I worked for WPP for a number of years
Okay.
as a
And then
lead.
somewhere in there you went to Mattel after dealing with the toys, you actually dealt with the toys,
Yeah,
right?
exactly right. Yeah. But it was really at WPP where, I began leading a lot of digital crisis work around the world for everything from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster to the Boy Scouts, to the collapse of Wall Street, to the Boston terror bombing. And really began to understand this unique nexus of where my career had taken me, where I was a traditional media native, kind of grew up in that space, understanding the power and the role of the mainstream media to drive awareness, but then also becoming a digital and social media native at the birth of that. And all that kind of culminated when I moved to Los Angeles to begin kind of my shift into media entertainment. University of Southern California, the Annenberg School of Communications asked me to come and create the graduate course in crisis communication. And I said, okay. And I went to go find my book list. And I could not find a single book that didn't suck. They were all these very old, tired, but paint by numbers approach to crisis communication that simply don't work in today's media cycle. And that's kind of the entry of my book. Because we used to talk about the 24/7 news cycle. And today we're in what I call the 1440 news cycle. That's how many minutes there are in a day. And
There you
every
go.
single one of those minutes can impact your brand. You don't have an hour any longer to engage. You have minutes. You need to be thinking along those lines. So this book really pulls together lessons throughout the last 25 years of my career in the crisis trenches. It is really designed for anyone with a reputation. You could be a celebrity, you could be a media executive, you could be a small time owner of a small business, you could be a nonprofit executive. If you have a reputation worth defending, and you recognize that it's simply a matter of when and not if the crisis moment will come for you, this book is for you.
And in today's world, given all the announcements now, if you're either in the stock market or you're shopping for groceries, or you happen to be a Democrat like me, communicating under fire is right there. Okay, so now this is a relatively short show, but I want people to know, first of all, where can they find the book?
Books everywhere books are sold. We have a great distributor, Simon and Schuster, distributing our books, so you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you buy your books. The audiobook just came out on Audible, so you can get that on Amazon as well. Excited about that. So yeah, the book has been doing pretty well.
Now, on the Audible, you're not reading the book.
You're guessing that because I have a terrible voice. I used to
No,
think I had.
no, no. I think their model is they have professional readers, don't
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I've always been told I have a face for radio, but apparently I don't have a voice for it either. So,
they?
so yeah, they did hire a professional reader who has read the book, which is great because I didn't really want to have to read 62,000 words. But yeah, the book's out. It's been fun to see kind of the reactions, of folks who really found value in the book.
All right, now listen. There are, I am sure, people who are somewhere between your age and my age, which would say, "My God, I know so much. I've done so much. I need to write it down." Would you advise? Yeah, I'm looking at that smile, suggesting that you said it's a whole lot harder than you thought it was going to be. What was it like actually doing that?
I'm a writer by just trade, so I love writing. The writing actually was really thoroughly enjoyable. The hard part is actually selling a book in this day and age.
Really?
There are so many ways you can self-publish, and so that market is kind of over in this space. But to actually get a publisher to buy a book, to take it to market for a first-time author, to navigate that process, if your name isn't, if you don't have some big marquee name, is a challenge. I would encourage anyone who's passionate about writing to write a book today. I think that there's just a huge market for even niche books. I think if your goal is to have it sold to a large publisher, you need to have a broad enough audience that they can see it. As I said, in the case of my book, it really is designed for anyone with a reputation worth defending. We cover everything from cancel culture to data breaches to how you engage. And, I tell a couple Roku stories about how we dealt with some of the distribution fights and how you understand and make sure you get ahead of the media cycle. So it's really designed for that broad-based audience. And that's going to be important if you want to take your own book to market today.
All right. Well, I would say that I'm probably not one of those because my writing is limited to 5 column inches. That's how I was trained. That's what I do. And that's why it turns out that talking is actually quite a bit easier for me. But you were at Samba, you were at Roku, you were at Rubicon, and you've been knocking around. Can you share the Roku story? I mean, you wrote it down.
Yeah, I wrote it. Yeah,
it's like out there.
Yeah, so the moral of the story of that chapter, and the book is designed kind of to be little vignettes. So there are stories that you can take.
There you go.
One.
Okay, short bits. I understand that.
Yeah. So the goal of this particular chapter was to articulate the importance of telling your story first and being the first one into the marketplace with the story and not being on defense. So we retell the story of the Roku NBC Peacock distribution agreement. You have to kind of go back in the time machine to remember that NBC, the old cable warrior, was dusting off its old distribution playbook where they were going to say, "Oh, Roku's being obstinate. They're denying consumers the right to have access to the channels they want." Whereas the reality was NBC was driving a really unfair deal for their.
Well, no, wait a minute. What NBC was saying was Roku's just acting like those goddamn cable operators.
Well, yeah, which is silly
right?
Since they were. It was the pot calling the kettle black since it was.
No, because they're Comcast.
They're Comcast. NBC is saying, "Oh my goodness, someone's pulling a distribution agreement." And the reality is that Roku was simply asking for its fair share. So this chapter walks through our decision to do something the company had never done before, and that was to aggressively and proactively engage in the court of public opinion, to tell our story directly to consumers, to do a full PR media blitz. We started at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Friday because, as this book will tell you, every crisis happens on a Friday, usually of a holiday weekend. And by 2 p.m., NBC had returned to the table and signed the contract as is, because we had so effectively shined a light on what was really unfair negotiation tactics by NBC, asking for things that were just unrealistic. And we engaged consumers fully and with a fully transparent approach, rather than what the instinct for many people is in a crisis is to kind of be quiet, keep their head down, try to, negotiate behind the scenes. But if you know your opponent if you know their playbook, which we know the distribution playbook of these guys, the carriage war playbook, if you know the playbook, you want to get out in front of it. And that was the moral of that chapter.
Interesting. And just help us understand approximately when did that happen? What year?
That would have been 5 years ago.
5 years ago. So right, my good heavens, at the beginning of COVID.
Right, beginning of COVID. Yep.
Well, by the way, 5 years ago is when I started doing these damn shows. So, Okay. So you've got the Roku bit. What else can you tell us that is illustrative from the book in terms of stories? Again, my audience is mostly media and entertainment and advertising.
I think there are a couple key things to take away from the book. The first we touched on, it's really having the mindset. It's a matter of when, not if, your crisis moment's going to occur. It's going to happen. It may not be huge. And understanding kind of the role digital and social play in it. I talk about, it plays one of 3 roles. It's either the instigator where it starts the crisis, or it's the accelerant where it takes the crisis that would have happened offline and explodes it in a huge way. But importantly, we talk a lot about how it's also the extinguisher, how you use all these tools around us to put out the crisis fires. And that's a critical part of the book. And I spend a lot of time in the book talking about this golden moment that comes in every crisis. And it's hard for the person who's under fire to believe it will ever come, but it does come. And that golden moment is when you've largely addressed and solved the crisis of the moment.
Yeah.
and you tell the world while they're still paying attention, because you have them for a fleeting second before they move to the next issue, wait and see what I do next. Judge me by what we do next. And you have that moment to pivot out of the darkness
Yep.
and actually make some lemonade out of this disastrous moment. So I detail several examples of that throughout my career, how we've done that for industries, for automotive manufacturers going through recalls, for Johnson & Johnson that had challenges that I
Yeah, for
managed
sure. Yep.
where we say, don't judge us by what we the past, judge us by our next actions, and here's what we're going to do. And then you have the moment to pivot forward. So that's a key takeaway from the book, that even in the darkest hour, there will be a fleeting moment where if you're ready for it, you can grab it and you can pivot to the positive narrative to move forward.
Now,
I think, go ahead.
your job at Telly is your chief strategy officer, and it sounds like the book tends to be more strategic coming down. But do you deal with the tactical side, how to manage, for example, social media now?
Yeah, so we do get into a little bit of the tactics. I would say think of the book like communicating under fire has a lot of meanings. The broad one is I'm one of the few people in press who've actually had live RPGs dropped on my press conference before. So I actually was trying to do a press conference while under fire at one point.
There you go.
But I use the firefighter analogy a lot. And so, think of all those things you're talking about, how to use social, how to, use X and TikTok and others, Reddit. Those are kind of like the axes and hoses of a fireman. Just because you have them doesn't mean you know how to use them. So we want to first instill the mindset that you need to have that says, I need to be prepared for my moment when it's going to come. It's not about crisis avoidance. It's about crisis preparation. I need to understand the media cycle which I'm engaging in is now one I don't control. It needs to be fed constantly every minute of the day. Otherwise, somebody else will tell my story. It's one that's critical that you don't become the villain. And we talk a lot about that. In a crisis, data breaches and others, there's a real critical moment where you either can be a victim along with those who've been hurt,
Yep.
or you make bad decisions that then alienate those who've been hurt, and you now become the full-on villain. There are critical decision factors that can be made that you need to avoid that keep you in that victim boat with everybody else so that you can emerge stronger on the end. So those are some of the key things that the book tries to bring to life.
Cool, man. Well, if you ever need a chapter on dealing with the social media that I deal with, I would title it "Shortness is Next to Godliness."
I love it.
Good heavens! For example, this show, with the viewers that we get for the full show are about 20% of the total impressions and views that we get for all the short clips that I put out about this show in the days before it runs. And those things, my target is always 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay. So that when you're scrolling down through your LinkedIn feed, it's actually there and it's playing. But all right. Well, you know what? It sounds like it's some good advice. How many pages is this monster of yours?
It reads quick. It reads quick. I had a great review from a CEO of a media and ad tech company who hosted my New York book party. And he said, look, everybody has a friend who writes a book, and you kind of feel like you have to read the book. This is a good book. I read it on a plane. It was designed to be picked up, and you can read it on the plane, and you take away 5 actionable insights that'll help you to ask the right questions of your team, to make sure you're crisis ready for when your moment comes.
Okay. Last thing now, if I'm reading this on a plane, is this a New York to LA plane or a New York to Sydney, Australia plane?
I think you could probably do it. I think if you listen to the Audible, you could probably do it on New York to LA.
Is that right?
Yeah, maybe halfway of your round trip on the way back, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, Dallas Lawrence, thank you very much. I'm ordering my copy now. So everybody, I think you ought to go take a look at Communicating Under Fire from Dallas Lawrence, our friend from Telly. And this will air in a couple of weeks. So I thank you for your time, buddy.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys very much. Have a great one.